The worst part is that you knew. Not completely. Not consciously. But somewhere beneath the excuses, beneath the hope, beneath the endless explanations, you knew. That's why the goodbye didn't feel like a discovery. A confirmation of something you had been arguing with for months. Maybe longer. Because most people don't get blindsided by the end. They get worn down by it. The end arrives slowly. Conversation by conversation. Silence by silence. Disappointment by disappointment. Until one day the thing you've been sensing finally, but that's not when the story actually started. The story started much earlier. In a moment so small you almost missed it. A moment nobody else would have noticed. You were talking. Maybe telling them about your day. Maybe sharing something you were excited about. And they responded. They even smiled. Nothing was wrong. Yet when the conversation ended, you were left with a strange feeling you couldn't explain. Not because of what happened. Because of what didn't. Because for the first time, being with them felt strangely similar to being alone. You went home and told yourself you were overthinking. By morning, you were still thinking about it. That's usually how it begins. Not with certainty. With discomfort. A quiet feeling that something has shifted. Something you cannot prove. Only feel. And that's where the real conflict starts. Not between you and them. Between you and your own perception. Because accepting that feeling would force you to confront a possibility you aren't ready to confront. That maybe the relationship isn't becoming different. Maybe it already is. So you do what most people do. You start negotiating with reality. You collect explanations. They're stressed. They're tired. They're distracted. Everybody changes. Everybody gets busy. Everybody goes through phases. And maybe all of those explanations are true. But there comes a point where you are no longer explaining their behavior. You are protecting yourself from what their behavior might mean. That's the part people rarely admit. Because deep down, the problem isn't that you don't see what's happening. The problem is that seeing it would hurt less than accepting it. So instead, you wait. You watch. You hope. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin searching for proof. Proof that everything is okay. Proof that it isn't. One night you find yourself scrolling through old conversations. Not because you miss the messages. Because you're comparing them. Looking for something. Trying to identify the exact moment the atmosphere changed. The exact moment enthusiasm became politeness. The exact moment curiosity became routine. The exact moment effort became habit. You tell yourself you're being nostalgic. But nostalgia isn't what keeps you awake. You're investigating. Trying to solve a mystery you already know the answer to. And that's what makes it exhausting. Because every piece of evidence points in the same direction. Yet you keep hoping it points somewhere else. Then something stranger begins happening. You start noticing things that never used to matter. Not because you've become insecure. You notice when they seem more alive talking to someone else. You notice when they laugh harder with strangers than they do with you. You notice when a conversation that once would have lasted an hour now struggles to survive 10 minutes. You notice how often you're the one reaching out. The one continuing. The one reviving. The one carrying. And each realization creates a small crack. Not in the relationship. In your certainty. That's when people begin changing. Not dramatically. Quietly. You think about messages before sending them. You rewrite things. Delete things. Shorten things. You become aware of yourself in a way you never used to be. Not because you're trying to express yourself. Because you're trying not to lose them. And that is where self-betrayal often begins. Not when someone leaves. When you start abandoning parts of yourself to make their leaving less likely. You stop bringing up things that bother you. You stop asking certain questions. You stop expressing certain needs. Not because they disappeared. Because you are afraid of becoming difficult. Afraid of becoming exhausting. Afraid of becoming one more reason for the distance to grow. So you become easier. More understanding. More patient. More forgiving. At least that's what you call it. But deep down, something else is happening. You are becoming smaller. One compromise at a time. And the frightening part is that it feels like love while it's happening. Only later does it feel like loss. There is a moment many people experience but almost never talk about. A moment so humiliating they usually keep it to themselves. You're staring at your phone. Not because you're expecting a message. Because you've already checked. And checked again. And checked again. You know nothing new has appeared. Yet somehow you look anyway. Not for attention. For reassurance. For evidence. For something that tells you the connection still exists in the way you need it to. That's when you realize something uncomfortable. The relationship isn't making you feel secure anymore. It's making you search for security. And those are not the same thing. The deeper the uncertainty grows, the more your standards begin moving. A short conversation feels meaningful. A small compliment feels important. Basic attention feels reassuring. And one day a realization arrives that is difficult to ignore. You have become grateful for things that once would have disappointed you. That realization hurts. Because it forces you to see how much has changed. Not just them. You. The version of you from a year ago would have noticed immediately. The current version is simply relieved to receive what used to be normal. That's what loneliness does. Especially the loneliness that exists inside a relationship. The kind where somebody is still there. Still replying. Still talking. Still showing up. Yet somehow you miss them anyway. You miss them while they're sitting beside you. You miss them during conversations. You miss them while looking directly at them. Because what you're missing isn't their presence. It's their presence in the way it used to exist. And eventually the hardest truth begins surfacing. You aren't grieving the relationship's ending. You're grieving its disappearance while it was still alive. That's why the goodbye feels strange when it finally arrives. People imagine it should be shocking. But often it isn't. Painful, yes. Devastating, sometimes. But shocking. Not always. Because a part of you has already been grieving. A part of you has already been mourning. A part of you has already spent months preparing for a reality the rest of you refuse to accept. And when the words are finally spoken, something unexpected happens. You realize the goodbye wasn't the beginning of the loss. It was the end of the argument. The argument between what you felt and what you wanted to believe. The argument between your intuition and your hope. The argument that exhausted you for months. Maybe that's why the waiting hurts more than the ending. Because the ending only takes a moment. The waiting takes pieces of you. Your certainty. Your confidence. Your honesty. Your ability to trust what you're feeling. The waiting asks you to stand in front of a truth and pretend you cannot see it. Again. And again. And again. Until reality finally refuses to be negotiated with anymore. And years later, when you think about the relationship, the goodbye is rarely the memory that follows you. It's the moment before it. The first strange conversation. The first unexplained discomfort. The first time being with them felt strangely similar to being alone. Because that was the moment you started knowing. And the tragedy was never that you didn't know. The tragedy was how long you spent trying to convince yourself that you didn't. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, subscribe for more psychological explorations of human behavior.